My body was not mine. Amelia's testimony. They said it was just a job. Bar service. Smiling. Light flirting. But soon, we were in rooms with locked doors and prices on our time. We weren't people anymore. We were bodies, and bodies had to be shaped, maintained, and trained. They started with our butts. Every day before our shifts, we were lined up like soldiers, heels on, tight skirts, a clipboard in someone's hands, and they made us squat, 50, sometimes 100, down, up, slow and deep, they said. Clients noticed curves. Some girls cried quietly while squatting. I remember my thighs burning, my knees shaking. We weren't allowed to stop. One girl fainted once they made her sit, gave her water, and told her to finish later. This wasn't fitness. It was conditioning. They wanted perfect asses, tight, round, bouncy. Not for health, not for us. For sale. Then came the diet rules. No bread, no sugar, no dairy, no salt. No more than 55 kilograms, ever. If you gained weight, you were taken off the roster. No clients for fat girls, they said. We started taking laxatives. Some girls made themselves vomit. One stopped having her period for 5 months. We had to weigh ourselves every morning. Naked. Quiet. Write it on the whiteboard in the bathroom. No privacy. Just numbers. If your number was too high, they gave you extra squats. Or they'd assign you the worst men, the aggressive ones, the old ones, the ones with no limits. They turned us into competitors. They compared us constantly. Look at Sophie's waist. Look at her ass. Be like her. Sophie trained like a machine. Her body changed. More curves. More demand. They praised her in front of everyone. Me? I fell behind. I lost weight, but not the right kind. My eyes were tired. My skin pale. I became the before photo. They told me to try harder, push your hips more, arch your back, show more. They even had us walk differently, slow steps, hips swinging, head tilted. They made us rehearse mirror poses for the clients. Smile with your body, they said. Sell the movement, not just the skin. At one point, I forgot how to walk normally. Everything became a performance, a product. Food became punishment. Exercise became control. My reflection became a stranger. There were days I didn't speak at all. Just squatted, worked, showered, weighed myself, went to bed. They called it maintenance. I called it obedience training. My body wasn't mine anymore. It was a business asset.
The autumn train was late. It moved slowly into Prague, dragging behind it fields blurred with fog, damp tree lines, and forgotten stations with peeling paint. The compartment smelled of instant coffee, fatigue, and sleepless travel. The metal cart clattered down the aisle, its wheels bumping softly while passengers dozed with their heads against the windows, afraid to miss the moment the city would first appear. 2 young girls sat together in silence, their eyes rarely lingering on anything for long. They were quiet, unremarkable, one clutching her backpack tightly, the other with arms crossed, a half-empty bottle of water tucked into the netted side of her bag. They looked tired, but not broken. Ahead of them was a city that promised something new. Prague, a name that sounded like escape, like a word from childhood fantasies, or shiny brochures that whispered, study abroad, work freely, begin again. The train hissed and slowed beneath the high arches of the main station. They stepped out into air that smelled of wet pavement and cold stone. The streets glistened under the streetlights. Trams screeched on their rails. The city felt awake, unconcerned with their arrival. There was no romance, no cinematic welcome, just traffic, strangers dragging suitcases, posters for politicians, cracked sidewalks. But for 2 girls who just derailed their old lives, even the city's indifference felt electric. Their rented flat sat in one of the outer districts, where the buildings all looked the same concrete blocks, with windows like tired eyes. The stairwell reeked of mildew and old paint, but behind the apartment door was something close to shelter. A small room, 1 narrow bed, a fold-out chair, a chipped kitchen tile. All of it foreign, but for now, enough. The first few days were quiet. They walked through the city, collecting snapshots of towers and bridges, drinking cheap coffee out of vending machines, watching the Vltava move like a dark ribbon between stone. The city was beautiful, in a way postcards always exaggerate, but here, it felt real. In the cold, in the drizzle, it still offered the illusion of possibility. But behind every photo and every quiet night, there was something hollow. The money was thinning. The promises from agencies, once loud and hopeful, had gone silent. No jobs, no responses. Hope was shrinking faster than their phrases in check. One evening, after a walk to the discount supermarket, one of them picked up a flyer on the wet pavement, glossy, bright, a silhouette of a woman, bathed in red light. The words were simple: no experience needed, no language skills, cash paid nightly. It wasn't what they had come for, but it was the only thing that seemed to offer anything at all. The city did not notice. It kept flashing its lights, spinning its trams, selling its hot dogs beside the station. It didn't care. And so they began to descend, not yet knowing how deep the floors beneath their feet could collapse. The red light wasn't a warning. The club didn't look like much from the outside. A black metal door, a single neon sign that flickered with exhaustion. The street was nearly empty, save for a few parked cars and cigarette butts crushed into the concrete. It was the kind of place most people passed without noticing or pretended not to. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with perfume, sweat, and old smoke. The music wasn't loud, but it was constant, a synthetic rhythm that didn't invite dancing, only distraction. Dim red lighting stretched along the walls, painting everyone in shades of heat and shadow. There was no elegance, no glamour, just worn leather booths, sticky bar counters, and the dull clink of empty glasses. The girls stood near the entrance at first, uncertain if they should even cross the threshold, but there was no one to stop them, no one to ask what they were doing. The place had the kind of atmosphere that welcomed silence and didn't care about names. Someone handed them forms. No questions, no small talk. The papers were vague, the ink smudged. The words, entertainment service, cash in hand, discretion, circled like vultures around each sentence. At the bottom, a place to sign. No official IDs were asked for, no contracts, no real proof of what they were agreeing to. They started behind the bar, not serving, observing, watching other girls move through the space, laughing, leaning, bending their bodies into shapes that sold something wordless. Some customers were alone, some drunk, some both. Money passed quietly between hands, eyes scanned without apology. No one told them what to do. Not really. Instructions were given in looks, in nods, in the absence of refusal. The first nights were slow. They cleaned glasses. They watched. They stayed close to the edge of things, pretending the red light wasn't for them. But even in the corners, the weight of it crept in. They began to notice things, the stiffness in the smiles of the girls, the glances from the men that lingered too long. There was a feeling, constant and quiet, that this place didn't just want their presence, it wanted something else. The pay was small, but real, enough to cover rent, enough to breathe, if only for a week. It gave the illusion of survival, which, in that moment, was enough to silence the questions. Soon, they were asked to wear different clothes, not uniforms, but costumes tight, short, glittered, things that didn't feel like theirs. The red light now felt closer. They weren't standing at the edge anymore. The city outside kept moving. Morning trams rattled past their window. Students laughed in courtyards. Tourists snapped photos near the river. But inside the club, time dissolved into a loop of lights, music, and a quiet erasure of self. They hadn't yet done anything they couldn't take back, but they were beginning to understand how easily the ground gave way beneath them, how softly one could fall without making a sound. The money disappeared faster than it came. Rent, food, transit tickets, the quiet costs of staying afloat in a foreign city, all of it devoured the small bills they received each night at the club. What had seemed manageable for a week now stretched thin. They stopped buying coffee, stopped going to the centre. Their world shrank to 3 locations: the apartment, the tram, The club. Their bodies began to feel the rhythm. Nights without sleep left their faces hollow. Mornings came too bright. The red light stayed behind their eyelids even after they shut them. The city was still beautiful, but it had nothing to do with them anymore. The work changed slowly, like warm water turning to boil. One evening, they were told to sit and talk with a customer, just keep him company, smile, laugh a little, flatter him. The next evening, the same thing, but closer, less laughter, more hands. The instructions were never spoken plainly, just implied. There was always the freedom to say no, but it was a freedom that came with consequences. Refusal meant fewer shifts, less money, a coldness in the faces that once smiled at them, so they didn't refuse. Touch became part of the job. At first, they convinced themselves it wasn't real, that it was temporary, that they were just playing a role, pretending. But pretending didn't protect them from what their bodies remembered afterward. They never talked about it with each other. Their conversations, once light and full of plans, had dried up. At home, they existed like furniture, present, but wordless. Each of them alone in the same silence. Sometimes, one of them would come back to the apartment and shower for an hour, scrubbing until the skin turned pink. Sometimes, they wouldn't come back until dawn. Neither asked questions. Neither wanted answers. The city outside kept running. Students continued their semesters. Office workers filled the trams at 8 a.m. Supermarkets, restocked their shelves. But inside their small, rented room, everything was sinking. Time blurred. Days meant nothing. Nights were just hours to survive. They stopped applying for other jobs, stopped checking the classifieds. The club had taken over everything, their money, their energy, their choices. They weren't working toward anything anymore. They were just working and sinking. The line, the one they swore they wouldn't cross, had moved. It always moved. Just a little. Just this once. Just for now. Until it was gone. The mirror didn't lie anymore. The shift was quiet. There was no sudden change. No breaking point. Just a slow descent, like a candle that melted, until nothing remained but silence and smoke. Amelia stopped noticing when she crossed the line. It had moved so many times already. At first, she kept her distance. She worked behind the bar, cleaned, observed. She told herself she was different from the other girls. She hadn't given in. She hadn't done what they had. She still had control. But one night, a man asked her to sit beside him. Just sit. Just smile. Just be warm and quiet. He slipped money into her hand, and she didn't say no, because saying no meant less work. Saying no meant being seen as difficult. She told herself it didn't mean anything. She still had her limits, but the limits kept shifting her hand on her back, a touch to the thigh, a whisper she didn't want to hear. The silence became easier than resistance. She stopped feeling much at all. At home, she avoided the mirror. When she looked, she didn't see someone she recognized. Just a body, painted and dressed, trained to survive. Her voice faded. Her appetite disappeared. She learned to sit still for hours and let her mind drift far away. She no longer believed this was temporary. The idea of escape became childish, unreal. The days were too short for hope, and the nights were too long for dreams. Sophie changed as well, though in a different way. She laughed more at work, moved more confidently. But there was something in her eyes, a distance, a dull shine that made her unreadable. They barely spoke now. There was nothing left to say. They were no longer two girls chasing something better. They were two girls floating, in the same quiet, in a life that didn't want them, but wouldn't let them go either. What wasn't said took root. The silence between them grew louder. There was no argument, no final moment that split them apart. Only the accumulation of things not said, of wounds not shown, of nights not explained. They passed each other like ghosts, careful not to disturb whatever fragile rhythm kept them from breaking entirely. At the club, Amelia moved automatically. She didn't flinch anymore. She didn't react. Her face had learned how to smile on command. Her hands knew where to rest. Her voice had become soft, neutral, practiced. The men came and went. They blurred together. Their hands, their money, their wants. None of it surprised her now. She stopped searching for other work. She no longer opened job listings. The club was everything. It consumed her time, her body, her space inside. Sophie drifted further. She stayed out late. Sometimes she didn't return until morning. When she did, she didn't explain. She collapsed onto the bed, face turned to the wall, and said nothing. Amelia didn't ask. There was no room left for questions. Once, Amelia found her sitting on the bathroom floor with the water running and her clothes still on. She looked hollow, as if something inside her had already left. Amelia didn't speak. She stood in the doorway, then turned away. She didn't have words that could help. The apartment felt smaller with each week, the air heavier, the windows dirtier, the silence more permanent. It wasn't safety. It was just shelter from the weather outside and inside. They no longer imagined futures. They no longer planned. They had become maintenance workers of their own numbness, keeping it level, manageable, tolerable. What began with a flyer on the pavement had turned into a life they hadn't chosen but couldn't step away from. The city didn't care. The world outside continued. But for them, something essential had stopped moving. They were no longer waiting for rescue, only for the next shift. Resistance without sound. They didn't want this. Not a single part of it. That truth lived in Amelia's chest like a fist, tight, trembling, useless. She never said it aloud, but it burned through her thoughts every night. I don't want this. I never wanted this. It echoed behind every forced smile, every quiet yes she gave when she meant no. The illusion that they had chosen this life was everywhere, in the way the men smiled at them, in the way the manager at the club said, flexibility, instead of control, in the way the other girls whispered, we all do what we have to, as if that erased the violence of not being allowed to leave. But the truth didn't care about illusions. Some nights, Amelia refused. She said no when a man touched her arm too firmly. She pulled away when the request came for more. She turned her face, lowered her eyes, shut herself down. It never mattered. The punishment was quiet, a shift cancelled, a cold shoulder, less money in the envelope. That was the club's strength. It never needed to scream. It used silence like a weapon, shame like a leash. Sophie fought too, in her own way. Not with words, but with distance. She hardened. She moved through the job like a machine, not because she accepted it, but because she wanted to make herself untouchable. Her laughter got louder, her clothes bolder. But beneath it all, she was folding inward. There were moments rare and brief when their resistance flared together, a glance between them, a breath held too long, a shared look that said, we hate this. We hate what it's doing to us. But it was never enough to stop the world they were caught in. They spoke of quitting, but only in their minds, of walking out, of disappearing. But then the bills arrived. Rent was due. Groceries ran out. And the only thing waiting outside the club was emptiness. Even in their resistance, they were alone. There was no one to tell, no system that would catch them, no protection for girls who didn't scream or who screamed and were ignored. Amelia carried the resistance like a second skin. It didn't save her, but it reminded her she was still a person, even if no one else saw her that way. She hated every minute of it. Sophie did too, but the world they were in didn't need their permission. It only needed their silence. Something cracked in Sophie. It had been coming for a long time, building in silence, hiding behind makeup and high heels, curled tight in her jaw each time she smiled at someone who didn't deserve it. But when it broke, it wasn't loud. It was cold, sharp, final. It happened during a shift like any other. The same music, the same lights, the same man who had been coming for weeks, entitled, persistent, smug. That night, he pulled her too close, touched her like she owed him, spoke to her like she was an object, like her body was something already bought. She stepped back, refused, firmly, clearly. He laughed. Later, the manager pulled her aside, calm, smiling. told her to be softer, to understand how this works, to not lose the good clients. That was when Sophie stopped pretending. She threw the heels in the trash bin behind the building after her shift. She took off the dress they'd made her wear and walked home in a long sweater, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her steps were quick, angry. Amelia followed, silently. She didn't ask questions. She recognized the look in Sophie's eyes. Not sadness, not fear. Rage. That night, Sophie didn't sleep. She sat by the window for hours, knees pulled to her chest. The city outside glittered as if nothing had changed. But something had. Something in her no longer wanted to submit, no longer wanted to endure. She started talking more the next day, not to customers, to Amelia, not about what had happened, but about everything else. About how tired she was, about how fake it all felt, about how sometimes she couldn't breathe when a man reached for her, about how she wanted to hurt something, just to feel real again. But talking wasn't enough. She stopped showing up for some shifts, lied about being sick. The club didn't believe her, but they didn't push, not yet. The club always waited. It knew most girls came back when they ran out of options. Sophie didn't run, not yet, but her skin itched with it. Her body carried the tension of someone standing at a cliff's edge, not knowing if the fall was worse than the cage behind her. Amelia watched her and understood. Because the rage was inside her too quieter, less sharp, but growing. They had been silent for so long, but now something was starting to move. It wouldn't save them, not yet, but it meant they were still alive. The club didn't scream. It never had to. Its power wasn't in threats or violence. It was in the way it erased resistance with indifference. It knew how to wait. It knew that hunger, fear, and shame worked better than force. And when those stopped working, it used reminders. They started small. Sophie's shifts were rearranged without notice. Her pay came in thinner envelopes. She was kept waiting at the door longer than the others, stared at, made to feel like she was the problem. No one said it directly. They never needed to. Then came the men. New ones, more aggressive. Like someone had whispered that she was willing now, that her silence had expired. They touched without warning, made requests she hadn't heard before. She said no. They didn't care. One night, she walked off the floor mid-shift and locked herself in the restroom. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat on the closed toilet seat with her arms wrapped around her stomach and tried to stop shaking. The manager knocked once, then again, then stopped. Amelia waited for her outside the door long after the club had closed. The next day, someone called Sophie's phone from a number she didn't recognize. A quiet voice on the other end asked if she remembered the form she'd signed, reminded her of the club's discretion policy, mentioned immigration complications if she caused problems. The message was clear: obedience or disappearance. Sophie didn't answer. She hung up and turned off her phone. For a few days, they stayed inside, curtains closed, phones off. The silence returned, not between them, but around them. A protective layer, a pause in the pressure. But they couldn't stay hidden forever. The rent was due, the food ran out, and the club didn't forget. When Amelia returned for her next shift, they acted like nothing had happened. The music still pulsed, the lights still burned red, but the stairs were different now. Sophie wasn't just a worker. She was a risk, and risks didn't last long. The pressure wasn't just to return, it was to obey, to submit, to smile again, like nothing had broken. But it had. They were still there, but they weren't the same, and the club could feel it. Sophie tried to leave. Not in the way most people imagined, no suitcase, no goodbye, just a slow unraveling, a quiet decision to stop being silent, even for a moment, to see if help meant anything outside of the posters, taped to tram stops and embassy walls. She found a number online, a hotline, supposedly for women in difficult situations. The language was vague. The promises were softer than they needed to be, but she called anyway. She used a different name. The woman who answered spoke slowly, kindly, too kindly, like someone speaking to a child. She asked questions Sophie didn't want to answer. Were you forced? Are you safe right now? Is anyone hurting you? Sophie tried to explain, but the words didn't come out cleanly. Not because she didn't know, but because the truth didn't fit into boxes. No one had dragged her. No one had beaten her. But she wasn't free either. There was a pause. Then the woman said she could send an email, that someone would review the case, that they'd be in touch. They never were. A week passed. No message. No follow-up. The second attempt was harder. Amelia tried this time, not calling, but visiting a women's centre they'd found on an old flyer. It was on the other side of the city, small, hidden above a pharmacy. The hallway smelled of bleach and waiting. A receptionist glanced up when she entered. Her smile was polite, distant. Amelia asked if she could speak to someone about work problems. The word trafficking hovered in her mouth, but wouldn't come out. She couldn't say it. It still felt too big, too final, like saying it would make it real. They handed her a form, asked if she had a residence permit, a legal contract, proof of employment. She had none of it. The woman at the desk told her gently that without documents, there was very little they could do. Maybe try again, later. Maybe talk to the police. But the police weren't safety. The girls knew that. In a foreign country, undocumented, invisible, the police were just another room with locked doors. They went home. They said nothing to each other that night, but the silence between them was different now. Not numb, not cold, just tired. The kind of tired that comes after screaming into a wall. They had tried, in their own small, trembling ways. But no one came, and now they knew. Help was just a word. The lights were red for a reason. They had stopped resisting, not out of agreement, not because they gave up, but because there was nothing left to hold on to. Resistance required strength, and the club had taken all of it, piece by piece. The girls were shells now hollowed out by silence, bruised by the weight of surviving. The decision came quietly. A short meeting in the back office. The manager didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke in finalities, not threats. There's another location, he said. You'll make more there. He didn't ask. He informed. And the girls understood what that meant. The red light district. They had seen it before late at night. From the tram. Windows lit in neon. Women behind glass. Eyes without expression. Bodies posed like advertisements. They used to pass by quickly, avoiding eye contact, pretending that world wasn't theirs. Now it was. They were driven there together, just past midnight. A black car, quiet, controlled. No music, no talk. A man in the passenger seat watched them through the rearview mirror the entire way. Not lustfully professionally, like cargo, like product. The building wasn't marked, but inside, it was clean, clinical, cold. They were handed new clothes, thinner than anything they'd worn before. Makeup kits, a list of prices, then rules. No leaving the room, no using their real names, no discussing the club, no refusing, within reasonable limits. Cameras in every hallway, security stationed at the door, watching every step. They were no longer performers. They were offerings. The room Amelia was assigned had soft pink lights and a full-length mirror, a narrow bed, a stool, a button to call security, if needed. But she knew it was for the customer's safety, not hers. The first man arrived just after 1 a.m. He was older, calm, well-dressed. He didn't speak much. He smiled. She smiled back. She wasn't there anymore. Her body moved. Her hands obeyed. But she had disappeared. Somewhere far inside herself. Somewhere without sound or colour or pain. She watched from a distance, waiting for it to end. Sophie was in the room next door. They didn't see each other again until morning. When they were led back to the car, no one said a word. The sun hadn't risen yet. The street was empty. The windows they had stood behind were now dark. The lights were off. But they had done their job, and the lights would be back on again tonight. What stayed inside The morning after was too quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet. The kind that follows something violent, something irreversible. A quiet that settles over everything, like ash. Sophie sat at the edge of the bed, still in her clothes from the night before. Emilia didn't ask how she felt. She already knew. They didn't speak on the way back to the apartment. The city was just beginning to stir, trams humming, cafes unlocking doors, early workers moving without hurry. The girls didn't belong in that world anymore. It moved forward while they sank. In the apartment, Sophie went straight to the bathroom. The water ran for nearly an hour. Emilia sat at the kitchen table, hands on her knees, staring at the floor. She couldn't cry. She couldn't even breathe properly. Her chest ached in a way that didn't come from the body. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere language didn't reach. She had done what was asked. She had survived the night, but something had stayed behind. Something essential. Something she wasn't sure she would ever get back. Later, Sophie came out wrapped in a towel, her skin raw from scrubbing. She didn't look at Emilia, just lay down on the bed and curled into herself, as if trying to take up less space in the world. Emilia didn't move. The room felt smaller than ever. They didn't eat that day. They didn't sleep, either. There was no talk of quitting, no plans, no hope. The machine had worked. They had been broken in, quietly, efficiently, without blood. The phone buzzed once around sunset. A message. Same time, same place. Expected. They said nothing. That night, they returned. Their bodies were there. But the rest of them, whatever was left, stayed behind. In that dark, still morning, curled in the corner of a small room, afraid to move. The distance between them. They stopped looking at each other. Not because of shame, not even guilt, but because something between them had shifted, quietly and completely. After the first night behind the glass, something fragile that had always connected them had snapped. They still lived in the same space. They moved around each other like shadows carefully, without sound. One would stand while the other sat. One would sleep while the other stared at the ceiling. Their lives no longer ran parallel. They had diverged in silence. Emilia tried. Once. Reach across the distance. She brought Sophie tea one morning, set it beside her without a word, waited. But Sophie didn't look up. Her eyes were on the window, where nothing was moving. The tea went cold. Emilia never tried again. The routine deepened. Nights under red light. Days inside a room that no longer felt like home. Meals were mechanical. Hygiene was survival. Thoughts became dangerous. They had to be pushed down, ignored, replaced with noise, or nothing at all. Sophie began taking pills. Emilia never asked what they were for. She could guess. Sometimes Emilia would catch a glimpse of herself in the mirror, in the club, or at home, or in the shop window walking back from work, and she wouldn't recognize the girl looking back. Not because she looked different, but because there was nothing behind her eyes, nothing she wanted to claim. She began to forget details, what day it was, how long it had been, what she had said last week. The past blurred. The future didn't exist. There was only the next shift, and the next. They no longer shared pain. That was the most painful part of all. Before, even when they suffered, they did it together, in quiet, in glances, in the way their bodies stayed close in sleep. Now they suffered alone, completely, as if being seen might break them further. The space between them wasn't filled with anger, it was filled with survival, and there was no room left for anything else. No one cared who they wanted. Choice disappeared completely. There had once been the illusion of preference, a gesture of consent, a glance that said not him, please not him. But now, even that was gone. They were told where to go, when to smile, and who to receive. And the men changed. They were older now, heavier, more aggressive, more entitled. Some arrived with the smell of alcohol on their breath, others with the slow, wet shuffle of tired flesh. Their hands were thick, their voices slow, their skin sagged, their eyes burned with ownership. Emilia was sent to room 6 that night. The man inside was already sitting on the edge of the bed, half-dressed, belly over his belt, sweat already dampening his shirt. He smiled when she entered. It wasn't kindness. It was victory. She felt the same reflex rise in her throat, not fear, not even shame, disgust. Not just at him, but at everything. At the room, at the lights, at the silent cameras, at the fact that she couldn't leave. She obeyed. She did what was required. She let his hands find her hips, his breath coat her shoulder, his weight press against her like a wall of grease and heat. Her eyes stayed fixed on the corner of the ceiling, where the plaster was cracked. She thought about her mother's garden back home, not because it helped, but because it was the only thing she had left that still felt clean. Sophie didn't speak afterward, but Amelia saw the way her hands shook when she lit a cigarette outside the club. Her face was white, her makeup smeared. The man she had been with was even worse, louder, rougher, careless. Their complaints weren't accepted. When Sophie tried to refuse, the manager said only one thing: they pay more. That was all that mattered. It wasn't about desire anymore, it never had been. It was about compliance, performance, endurance. They weren't chosen because they were wanted. They were available. That was enough. They learned to stop reacting, to go still, to vanish inside themselves, and let their bodies move without them. Afterward, they didn't speak for days. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything was too much. When the body stays and the mind leaves, something started slipping inside Amelia. It didn't happen during a single moment. Not during one of the heavy men. Not during the late-night walks back to the apartment. Not even under the red lights she had learned to ignore. It was slower than that. A drift. A quiet ungluing of body from self. She began to feel like she was watching herself from a distance, as if she were floating somewhere above, observing the girl who wore her face, her hands, her voice. The girl worked. That girl smiled. That girl let strangers into her room. But Amelia wasn't her anymore. During the long nights, she often couldn't remember what had happened afterward. She would wake in her own bed, unsure how she got there. Her legs sore, her stomach sick. Her heart dulled to a low, slow beat. She stopped feeling the touches. They were just movements now. Noise. Static. Sometimes, she stared into the mirror for minutes, without blinking, just looking, searching, wondering if there was still something inside that glass that belonged to her. Sophie noticed the change. She didn't say anything, but her glances lingered longer. She began placing small things next to Amelia's bed: water, food, a clean shirt, silent offerings. She was disappearing too, but more slowly, like someone drowning with their eyes open. They were both fading, but in different ways. Amelia began to hear ringing in her ears at night, a soft, high-pitched tone that came from nowhere and never stopped. She rubbed her temples, covered her head with pillows. Nothing helped. The sound wasn't outside. It was coming from inside the place where she used to live. The customers didn't notice. They never noticed. They only saw what they paid to see. They only touched what they believed was theirs. But Amelia was no longer there. She had gone somewhere else. Somewhere without pain, without light, without memory. Only the body remained. And that was all the club needed. Amelia had believed, once, that there would be a final point, a place where everything would stop, where the suffering would level out, where they could say, "This is the worst it can get." But it kept going. The customers blurred now. Their faces had no names, their voices no language. She heard only tones, demands, instructions, groans. Her body responded automatically, a machine built to perform one task, then another. No one asked how she was. No one cared if she smiled. They only wanted her silent, still, and available. She didn't dream anymore. At night, when sleep came, it was black, thick, like being buried. Sometimes she woke up unsure if she had even slept at all. Sometimes she hoped she hadn't. Then came the conditioning. The manager announced it casually, like it was part of a normal schedule. Every afternoon, before the night shift began, The girls were required to gather in the back corridor, still in heels, still in makeup, and perform squats. Dozens. Repetitions counted aloud by a supervisor holding a clipboard, as if it were a gym, not a brothel. They were told it was to keep the legs strong, to maintain tone, to please clients better. But it wasn't about training. It was about control. Their breathing grew heavy. Their thighs burned. Sweat rolled under their painted faces. Some of the girls cried without sound while they moved. No one dared stop. No one asked why. Even when Sophie grew weak, legs trembling, breath shallow, she forced herself to keep moving. She didn't look at anyone. Neither did Amelia. They became machines, synchronized bodies under fluorescent lights, stripped of purpose, beyond what they were being shaped for. Later that night, Sophie collapsed during a shift. She was standing in the hallway between rooms when her knees gave out and she folded to the floor, slowly, like a doll dropped by a bored child. No scream, no sound. Just a body, motionless on the cold tile. Security moved quickly. She was carried out the back door, not in panic, in routine. Amelia waited for her return for 3 days. She never came back. No explanation was given. No one asked Amelia if she knew where Sophie had gone. The club didn't need to explain. People disappeared, all the time in that world. Quietly, completely, as if they had never been there at all. The night after, Amelia stood in the same hallway where Sophie had fallen. She touched the wall. It was still cold. For the first time in weeks, she felt something sharp rise in her throat. Not grief, rage. It didn't save her, but it was something, a flicker in the dark. Something, still, alive. One was chosen, the other was watched. Something shifted again. Sophie, who had nearly collapsed, who had once whispered that she couldn't take it anymore. She was now the most requested girl in the building. The men waited longer to see her. Some returned twice in a night. One even tried to leave her gifts. Another offered more money just to speak with her. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, a different way she walked, how she held herself in the mirror, the way she spoke softer, but with more detachment. Her body, sharpened by exhaustion and repetition, now moved with mechanical grace. She had learned how to erase herself completely, and in that emptiness, she became perfect. They praised her for it. The manager began using her name in conversations with others. Like Sophie. Sophie doesn't complain. Sophie performs. Learn from Sophie. And Amelia felt it. The shift in tone, the glances, the pressure. She was being compared now, measured, watched. Every hesitation, every tired movement, every misstep noted. When she was slower to respond, someone would mention Sophie. When she flinched, someone would frown. No one asked if she was okay. No one cared why she was falling behind. They only wanted results. Her body wasn't enough anymore. Her silence wasn't obedience, it was weakness. And weakness wasn't profitable. Amelia began staying after hours, to stretch, to squat, to rehearse. Her knees ached, her back screamed, but it wasn't enough. She didn't shine. She didn't disappear the right way. She didn't please the way Sophie did. And Sophie? She barely looked at her anymore. They shared a space, but not a life. The rise of one had demanded the fall of the other, and the system, the club, the clients, the machine, knew exactly how to pit one broken girl against another. Not with cruelty, with reward. They had been sent to a private client outside the city, both of them. A car came late at night. Black windows, short instructions. They were told to behave, to smile, to listen. The man was rich, connected, generous, someone the club didn't say no to. They drove for hours, out of Prague, past towns, past streetlights, into forests, into silence. And then something broke. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the man himself, too confident, too drunk, too slow to lock his doors. Maybe it was the way he looked at them, like he was choosing what to ruin first. Or maybe it was Sophie's eyes, wide and still, like they had been the night she collapsed. Whatever it was, they didn't wait. They left. Not violently, not loudly, just left. A bag half-packed, a door left ajar, a wallet taken from the coat rack, a phone, a charger, cash. They walked, then ran, then waited by a dark road until a car stopped. An old man, confused, but not unkind. They didn't explain. They said they were lost. They cried. He took them to a small train station near the border. From there, they moved. Carefully, quietly. No credit cards, no calls. Just train after train. Country after country. Until finally, Belarus. Home didn't feel like home. Not at first. The air was colder. The streets familiar but faded. They stayed in an apartment, offered by a cousin of Sophie's. No questions asked. Just a key and a place to breathe. They didn't go outside much. They didn't speak of it right away. It took months. Emilia was the first to tell someone, a volunteer at a clinic. She didn't mean to the words just spilled. And once they started, they didn't stop. Names, rooms, red lights, squats. Old men, collapse, escape, shame. The volunteer didn't interrupt, just listened. Later, they asked if she wanted to report it, to file a statement, to testify. Emilia didn't answer, because telling wasn't about justice. It was about survival. They both spoke eventually not to the police, but to other girls, quietly, at night, in kitchens, in waiting rooms, online. They didn't try to fix anyone. They just said what had happened. Some listened. Some cried. Some left. Some didn't believe them. But the story was out now. Not for the world. Not for documentaries. But for themselves. So they could breathe. So they could sleep. So they could stop blaming their silence. They didn't call it healing. They didn't say it made them whole again. But they were no longer in the club. No longer under lights. No longer counted. No longer priced. They were broken, yes, but they were still here. And that was more than they had dared hope for.